urban vibes.
Okay, running? Okay, so yeah, back there. We had some issues here. Anyway, you already presented yourself. You told a bit about your profession or your
pre-pandemic profession.
Pre-pandemic profession as a soldier at the miliz. Now we went to the next thing. You're a musician for traditional music, we can say, and you have two very nice crossover projects. Tell us a bit about your two bands and how it goes.
Well, I have basically two bands with almost the same people inside. So is it two bands or is it one band that plays two different styles of music? That's an open question. Mm-hmm. So the one band is called Fourth Moon. We play mainly acoustic music with within Celtic music, let's say.
Okay.
It's instrumental. We have also a singer now since recently, and yes, we don't take just, it's all our own compositions, so it's not strictly speaking traditional music, but we take the language of traditional Irish and Scottish music and process it through our own lens of creativity. Mm-hmm. That project is going potentially well, was it not for a pandemic. Mm-hmm. So we have quite a lot of fans, especially in France, in Ireland as well, in America, internationally. So basically I'm never playing with this band in Austria because Austria somehow doesn't work for Celtic music at all, while Germany, Italy, France, Spain and everywhere else works pretty fine for it. So that's one for another podcast, for another question.
Right.
Why does Celtic music not work in Austria? I say it works. There's a few people to blame that there is no gigs for it, and I will call them out eventually. Anyway, it works very well in France.
Yeah.
So we had already a few tours now in October, in January, in March now. We'll be back in May and June and July.
Wow.
And so bigger and bigger and bigger in France mainly now. This band. The other band is basically almost the same people, but we play some electronic music and it's more cinematographically inspired, sort of like film music-ish, club music-ish, in between their epic soundscapes, and it's very conceptual. It's about space exploration, futurism, particle physics, etc. And the idea behind that was Celtic music or Irish music is so associated, with ancient stuff, with pubs, wooden frames, tweed jackets, these hats and 19th century stuff. And we said, well, it doesn't have to be. It can also be associated with, chrome, carbon fiber surfaces, office buildings, factories, future space exploration, all that. It doesn't have to be a retrofitted sort of aesthetic. It can also have future aesthetic. So that's what we did. Did a couple of the album was very expensive. It's probably one of the most expensive albums in the entire genres. Have some great people that contributed on it, like some of the guys from Wolfpack. Wolfpack's a pretty famous funk band now these days. So some of the guys are good friends and contributed in the electronic music production. So and this project has not worked live a lot yet because we haven't really done the changing of the thing for live music, for live settings. We have just made the album as an album project.
Studio album, yeah.
Exactly, and we're now in the process of creating the live show for this, and we're gonna start it in France as well because the audience there is the most receptive for this type of stuff.
Okay. Let's have a listen to that. We have one track here, Animator. Is that right?
Antimatter, yeah.
Antimatter. Oh,
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't read it correct. So Event Horizon. Let's have a listen here.
We went a little bit in the direction of 80s sounds, 80s synth sounds there.
Oh shit. Don't touch it.
And for the music video, we went to the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, the Centre Européen de Recherche Nucléaire, the large particle accelerator in Switzerland, in France. The entire idea behind...
Wait for it. Because otherwise I cannot synchronize it. That's kind of already staged live. But so you have the live concept, kind of. But the music needs some...
are still missing. Where the internet was born.
Huh?
That's where the internet, was born.
Yeah.
Where it went online first time.
Hast du den jetzt auch dabei, den Dudelsack?
Den
anderen.
Den kann man nur im Sitzen spielen.
Ah, okay. Kurze Haare hast du immer noch, ne? Jetzt sind sie schon ein bisschen länger. Jetzt geht's ab. Das ist so der keltische Drive, ne? Weißt du, wo ich das angefangen habe zu lieben? Da Titanic. Die Szene, wo sie da tanzen gehen.
Back to the 80s.
Wo habt ihr die kleine Bühne?
In Glasgow.
Wahnsinn, aber auch die Lichter, alles da. Krass, das ist der Teilchenbeschleuniger, oder?
Ja.
The video coming in the WhatsApp group. You should have seen it. Huh?
I didn't. Sorry.
You're not sorry. Are you? You're not sorry. Not sorry enough. Look, this is where the internet is born.
What?
The internet. The thing, you know, the internet, the little thing called internet. It's born there in this video. Alright. Event Horizon, dedicated to the scientists and technicians at CERN. So this is where the internet was born.
Yeah, that's where the internet went online first time in CERN. It was invented and constructed to transfer large amounts of data between several universities, research facilities, etc. And then it just developed into what we are so hooked on and dependent on today. Huh?
It's crazy, huh?
What a changed world.
But you said you wanted to say like the concept behind the video was what?
Well, we
sorry, that's the other song. We're gonna listen to it later.
Yeah. So the concept behind the entire project and the video. Sorry, do it again.
Sorry, yeah. The concept behind the video was.
The concept behind the video is basically antimatter. So antimatter was first hypothesized upon if it exists or not, and it was then later proven that yes, it does exist. And it's basically, I'm gonna do a very amateurish and simplified version of everything. The hypothesis, the theory is that after the Big Bang, there was for a short amount of time an equilibrium between matter and antimatter, but somehow, and you know, matter and antimatter, when it touches itself, when it collides, it annihilates each other. It just goes boom, and then both are gone. It's neutralized. So, because in theory, after the Big Bang, there should have been an equal amount of matter and antimatter, we don't really know why antimatter disappeared and matter is still there. So it should have neutralized each other equally, but it didn't. There's a tiny amount of matter that survived. So, and this tiny amount of matter that survived this initial annihilation process between antimatter and matter is basically what we are. So everything that there is there because of this imbalance that somehow and mysteriously was there between matter and antimatter. And so we're thematizing that, and we went to the Large Hadron Collider because that's where they find stuff like antimatter for real. That's where they bring the proof that these hypothetical concepts are real. And also CERN is the largest machine and the most complex machine mankind has ever built. And so we want to give an artistic sort of picture also to that and deal with that kind of thing.
Yes. Somebody is between my legs. Give me just a second.
It's not Otto Walkes?
Yeah, it sounds very cozy. So yes, and the other thing is like you have we just talked about like what was all the concern between your historical figures and historical artwork you're doing. You're not really doing it as an artist, but also yes, and in the other hand you do it as an expert for professional Roman history. So let's jump back to this discussion again. You just told us you had a European project which was like funded for millions and 2 million euros, but which you quit because it was a difficulty between the scientists and you as an expert for Roman culture. And tell us a bit, how did it come to, and how did you get, or how do you define yourself as an expert for this archaic culture?
Well, so the project, so we have to jump back a little bit to the start. When the pandemic hit and all our tours with the bands got cancelled, etc., I was asked to work for the University of Krems here in Austria as an expert for a project that I designed and that they wanted to hand in. It was handed in with Interreg, Danube Transnational Program. That's one of the funding mechanisms of the European Union for cultural and technological programs and projects. And we got actually 3.2 million euros funding for that project. It had over 19 partners and over 23 associated strategic partners in 10 countries. So Germany, Czech Republic, Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, etc., Moldova. Everything to do with the Roman Danube frontier and the European Union macro region of the Danube, which hosts about 115 million inhabitants. And the idea behind it was to use our common history. All these countries share one common cultural historical period, which is the Roman Empire. and we focused on late antiquity. That means the period between the 3rd century AD and the 6th century AD, because this period of the Roman Empire is not an Italian thing anymore. It is truly a Mediterranean, European, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious, multicultural empire. So something the EU sort of wants to be, and till now hasn't really managed to be. So very interesting that in antiquity we had such a state. And so the EU is interested, of course, in using this common heritage to bring people back together. So my idea, as an expert in living history, small definition of what that is. It's basically, you have historians that look at history, at written text, and at what archaeologists can find out in order to provide a congruent picture of what happened, what certain people did, what certain actors, state actors, etc. did, and which contracts led to what. And then there's archaeologists which are preoccupied with the material culture. They're looking for everyday life, and then also other more historic, significant events like battles, etc. And they're trying to find out, with what is there in terms of material culture, what happened there really. So sometimes there's a bit of a difference of interpretation between a historian and an archaeologist. So the historian says, in the text is written it was like this, so we should say it was like this. And the archaeologist says, well, the text may have written this, but I digged into the earth and I found this, and it contradicts what the text says. So we should go after what is really there.
The middle way.
Yes. And so the living history expert is somewhere in between that. He takes the interpretations of the historians, he takes the knowledge about the material culture from the archaeologists, and he forms a living display. That means we reconstruct, not costumes, but we reconstruct actual historical fashion. And we put them on ourselves, and we interpret historical events through this reconstructed, really very accurately reconstructed material culture. And the aim is to give people, audiences, more lively picture and a better approach, better understanding of a historical culture, and also the significance that it has for us today.
We can show one video where you are wearing 14 days a Roman armor.
Yes, that was one of my experiments.
It's 15 minutes. Maybe we can find the other one, which is a bit shorter maybe. Which one is the other one you did send? This is...
there's a short artistic one.
This one,
yes.
yeah, that's a short artistic one. So maybe we just have a listen to this one.
Vides, ut altas detinive candidum, soracte neciam sustineant onus. Silver
Shit. I hate
permitte divis cetera, qui simul
Do
stravere.
it again. Sorry. It's my touch play. My touch screen is...
Vides, ut altas detinive candidum, soracte neciam sustineant
Magst
onus.
du kurz austreten?
Silver laborantes gelunque,
Also ich spring schnell,
Ja,
flumina constitarin
weil das blende ich dann
acuto.
ein.
ja klar.
Das heißt, ich
Desolve frigus lignia super foco, large reponens atque benignius, de prome quatrimum Sabina, o taliache, merum diotta.
spricht er da? Lateinisch?
Ja.
Permitte divis cetera, qui simul stravere, ventus aequere fervido depoialantis, nec cupressi, nec veteres agitantor orni. Quid sit futurum cras, fuge quaere, et quam fustierum cumque dabit lucro ad pone, nec dulcis amores, sperne puer, neque tu coreas. Donne quirenti, camities abes morosa, num et campus et ariae, vedesque sub noctem susuri, composita repetantur hora.
Hello, great story.
Oh, it's already over.
Yep.
Oh shit. It took me too long, but I'm back now. I had to just get a bit of fresh air here. So back in time. This was...
Kanal Plus.
Oh, this is Kanal Plus. This was...
Jetzt.
Shut up. This was Ad Taliarchum, The Last Romance. A little artistic video of your of how you do it, like what you're practicing and what you're living, like what you told us, that you are like trying to live history, and that's not one way, like scientific or archaeological. It's something in between, isn't it?
Yeah, it's well, you need a scientific sort of mindset and approach. You need to understand scientific method in order to come to a very accurate picture, and to know where can I know stuff for sure and where can I not know stuff for sure, and how do I interpret these gray areas where I'm like, okay, we need to speculate, because speculation needs to follow some rules as well. It cannot just be a wild speculation. You cannot say, oh, well, we didn't find something, but that doesn't mean it didn't exist. Yeah, maybe something existed that you didn't find, but will you use a hypothetical construction, and where will you use it in order to create maybe a fantasy picture at the end, or will you use something else that's more sure to show people what accurately historical people looked like or acted like. And so the problem with that is that a lot of people that are purely in science and not in interpretation of scientific results have very different priorities. So for them, a project where it is about communicating with the public, with people that don't know science as such, or the ins and outs of science, but that want to have a quick and simple and relatable experience of what these scientific disciplines create as results. These people are really grateful for living history, for having, like a movie. Okay. When you watch a movie, what do kids prefer? Do they prefer to have a lesson on history, or do they want to see a historical movie?
Yeah, of course.
And so what we are trying to do is do live interpretation of history. And many scientists often have don't recognize the inherent value of that, that they need us and our expertise in order to really get their research across, in order to get people interested in it.
Yeah, but as you say, I mean, movie makers like kind of do it, but they do it all the time. Like if we watch like Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic dancing to Celtic music, or if we watch the same guy in that film, like The Man with the Iron Mask, for instance, there I think there's also a scene where they do dance, like old dances, like Louis XIV and these historical dance things. They are completely wrong. Like I had a teacher teaching me historical dance, and she said, oh my god, they did the purest performance for that movie. Like it's not right. It's right, but it's so pure, it's not really sophisticated. And so in these Hollywood movies, I have the impression, or Gangs of New York, for instance, I mean, is also a good example for us now wearing our hats. I lost my... that, yeah, it is always like a compromise, isn't it, to get back to history and try to figure out how it was in those days, and to make it real and to make it authentic, it's a very hard way, right?
Yeah, I mean, we need to differentiate here between the level that in living history where we're confronted with a limit, where we have to say, okay, we can interpret until here, and beyond that we cannot, and what generally movies and Hollywood producers think and do. So we can give much more accurate pictures through living history than what Hollywood directors and producers usually care for. So, for example, Braveheart is a very great example. Nothing, absolutely nothing, not a single thing in this entire movie is anywhere near historic accuracy. The story is completely wrong. The interpretation of William Wallace's character is completely wrong. Their entire outfit, the music, everything is wrong. Every single thing. Mel Gibson didn't give a shit about that. He said, well, I like this aesthetic and it's about, but that's always an excuse. Are you doing a historical movie about a historical figure, or are you doing an art project? And if you are selling your movie as an impression of a historical period and of a real historical person, of real historical events, then you have, in my opinion, the duty to not mislead your audience, because people are not making the difference. It's always said, oh, people can make the difference between a movie and between reality. They know it's not a documentary. No, we have a lot of research and statistics. People are not making this difference. If an image is repeated a lot of times, if it's inaccurate and cliches, if cliches are repeated a lot of times, it becomes a reality.
Yeah.
So we have all this culture today of speech control, you know? We have to gender and etc. because a habit becomes a reality. That's what we are told all the time. So I'm asking, why are we not policing then Hollywood and movie directors that just don't give a shit about historic accuracy and that falsify our vision of history? It makes big problems, you know. A lot of the wars we're seeing today and the conflicts, there's always some historical justifications, always some politician or some logic behind it that says, oh, well, history was like this, and therefore now we have the historical duty to act in this and this way. I'm like, well, if we started treating history like a science, like we treat mathematics, physics, climate science with the utmost respect. Most people, the mainstream does. They say, oh, we have to be really careful with how we portray that. But as soon as it's about history, nobody gives a shit. It's like, well, the historian says it was like this and this, but do we really need to care about that? Is it really so important? Yes, it is. Because wars are being fought over misunderstood historical narratives. Because if we don't take it serious, if we don't take the nuance in history serious, that's what we get. That's absolutely what we get.
Yeah, we will repeat like the mistakes of history.
Yes, Nazi Germany, all this ideology, it's probably the most extreme case of this example I'm trying to give. All this extreme ideology about Germanic race, descendants, Germanic high culture, which is a misinterpretation of the Nordic Bronze Age, for example. Google it if you don't know what that is. It's because they didn't know enough nuance about history. They had a completely wrong image of history and took the wrong conclusions and formulated a wrong ideology on that.
Yeah, they intentionally they did it. I mean, they really did it intentionally, I guess.
I'm not sure with everybody, you know, certainly some people, but a lot of people actually believe this stuff. And it's because they had a really wrong perception of history. They didn't know how to do historic science. And they thought, it's something that we still see today. We still see this
and it
today.
goes together with contemporary politics. Like the politics, as you said, they don't want to know about, or they just try to manipulate the history in the way that they can like start a new war, or that they can say, okay, we are independent, or that they can somehow sustain all these matters that
narratives and
narratives and stuff. So that's a really big subject, which is very interesting to hear. For sure, history is at schools and stuff, like it's how is it called? It's not really. It has not the weight.
Undervalued.
Yeah, undervalued. Yeah.
Underweight.
Underweighted.
In a lot of ways. Yeah. So school system is a perfect example. You have all this weight and all this focus on STEM. So that means like everything: physics, chemistry, mathematics, etc. Because people think, oh, well, that's where the good paying jobs are. So that's where we really need it. Who's saying, oh, do a history major and you'll have a great job? It's like nobody.
Yeah, my history teacher told me.
Exactly.
Why don't you study history? Because I was really interested into it, and I was really doing it. But this is really seldom. And then these people who go really studying history, they don't have at university as well. They don't have a real, they don't have a real status. Like, oh, you study history, okay, you study history, okay, history, forget about it. How do you want to gain your money? Exactly, that's the point. That's exactly the point. Here we go. Thank you for my hand. Thank you. Yeah, Gangs of New York. Here we are. A nice movie, isn't it? But still very cruel. Like, what about these? If we are into it, like, what about cruelty and violence in the past? I mean, it was much more maybe obvious and taking place than today. Or what do you think? Is it today the violence of the internet and the violence of the new weapons and stuff? Is it somehow? Is it
well, I wouldn't say it's comparable.
Comparable. Yeah.
What I'm always trying to sensibilize people or make some sensitivity for a subject is ancient warfare. For example, we often see in movies battles completely wrongly depicted. People just run into each other like senseless barbarians, thrashing at each other with weapons in a way that the weapons were not designed for and weren't made for. And you're getting hit in the face and you're all immediately dead and lying there vanquished. This is not how ancient warfare was. You have to imagine, I don't know, I hope most of your viewers and yourself have never seen a human die from getting stabbed or getting hacked to pieces. I unfortunately have. It's really unsettling. You are not dying a quick or a beautiful death from swords, lances, arrows or axes. It's really butchering. It's really a slow and very, very gruesome death. And that's what ancient battlefields were. You're getting hacked to pieces. And you have armor which protects you until it doesn't. And then you have like really mortal wounds, but that are not so mortal that you die quickly, but very slowly and painfully. So I'm against infantilizing ancient warfare. I'm against like making it not visible how gruesome it was. I'm against infantilizing ancient soldiers because we then infantilize soldiers also today. And if we look at the images of Ukraine today, this is very brutal as well. People are getting burned. People are getting shot to pieces by great caliber ammunitions. In explosions, this is very, very, very brutal warfare. And we should have a sensibility that war was never heroic. War was never clean. Was never a gentleman's affair. Never. And so we should be careful to use history in movies to educate and sensibilize ourselves that there is never again a sort of euphoria for war. And it didn't work because we infantilized it. We have today again a euphoria for war.
Still, it never stopped.
Mainly in countries that have absolutely no living recollection of war. So I'm really thinking that the accurate portrayal of history, the nuance of portrayal of history, so that we see there isn't a bad guy and a good guy always. There's always two good guys and two bad guys. They just define each other in the opposite way. And we need to keep this nuance also for today, because we are just creating bigger conflicts if we are not taking reality into consideration.
Airwaves. Thank you so much, Mike. About war, there's always that question: do we need an army? Do we need weapons? And then there's always the question, the answer: of course, we need to secure ourselves with weapons. Of course, yeah, it's a pity that we use weapons, but we need them. Like if you ask policemen, like I recently had a process going on, like with Corona. Oliver was with me, and I was surrounded by 5 policemen with the STG Sturmgewehr, and they were on the road in a U-Bahn in a metro station for it's called robuster Raumschutz. So it's they call it like this, or they called it like this, and they had the instruction to do this security thing for terroristic security reasons. And then they found me like without a mask, and they did stop me with their machine guns, and 5 people surrounding me, and I couldn't move on, and I had to show my cards, and I was very nervous. And then I talked to a good friend who said, okay, after half a year we talked again, and it got to court because I had to pay. They just did not see my doctor's receipt that I cannot wear a mask, and then I said to the lawyer, to the court woman, look, I'm traumatized. I'm psychologically traumatized now. If I go out on the stations and walk around, see policemen, I'm traumatized because of the weapon. And the policeman also went to court and said, you know, your psychological problems, and he was like laughing at me, and he was like, for sure we need these weapons, because yeah, it's a pity, but we need them because there is so much cruelty and crime, and we need weapons, and we need the police to have good weapons, and we need scenes like this, like robuster Raumschutz, like you as a citizen, you just walk to your working place, and then you get stopped by and they were also like mistreating me, you know. They were like, oh, you have 5 bank cards, why do you have 5 bank cards? What does it matter to you that I have 5 bank cards now? Are you kidding me, honestly? With your weapons surrounding me and asking me if I have 5 bank accounts? What the fuck? What the fuck? And so the question always, like, but also before this, I always like, it is such a hard question to say, do we need weapons? Like the clocks in Austria, they're very famous for weapons, aren't they? And they go with their horses and say John Travolta is coming and this horse riding, and they do horse competitions, and Lady Gaga is singing, and they are paying all this with weapon money. It's weapons sold to wars.
Of course, yeah.
So what's your opinion about weapons then?
Well,
it's a big question, I know.
As a soldier, I kind of prefer to have some when I need to go into action than not to have some, you know. And I think in general this question will be answered differently depending on where you are. Of course, in Ukraine at the moment, I think a great percentage of the population will be very clear about the answer to this question. I mean, they are asking for more and more weapons every day for self-defense, of course. In Iceland, likely the question will be answered differently. So it really depends a lot on context, I think. We're very lucky in Austria that we have a very small amount compared to other places of fire weapons that are in circulation. We have quite a restrictive weapons law. That means not a lot of people get concealed carry licenses. You can own a gun, but you have to transport it in a separate case from the ammunition, and you can go to a place where there's official shooting range. You can shoot there and then bring your gun back. You can't just pop it in your pants like a gangster,
like an American gangster,
half loaded or loaded, and walk around with it. it's very, very hard to get this license. In other places, it's very easy to get the license. And again, in other places, there's just such a tremendous amount of illegal guns that you can never take back control, like in El Salvador, for example, or Mexico. It's a war zone almost, from the amount of weapons that are around. So it will greatly depend on the actual situation you're in. So.
And the second question was like about the Ukraine conflict, which is taking place at the moment. What do you think? What opinion could we make up, or we had it about geopolitical Europe trying to be somehow geopolitical empire, like the ancient empires, and it's not working out because there is like conflicts, different conflicts around Europe, and also big players like Russia, China, and these other empires. They are still, America is still like on the road. How is the geopolitical situation at the moment in 2020, and what do you think? Where does it lead to, or do you have any visions?
Well, that's a very, very large question.
Yeah.
Before I answer it, I need to reveal a bit more about myself, because there's a lot of people that are now talking. As we had a lot of virus and epidemics experts over the last couple of months, we suddenly have a lot of geopolitical experts, etc. And I don't blame people, because we have the internet. It's more important to know the questions than to know the answers, because Google knows almost all the answers if you know the right questions, So of course a lot of people are getting more tech savvy and internet savvy, and a lot of people have more information and have more material to form an opinion. So I'm not even that critical about it. However, I've been already very much interested in geopolitics. I've been in an international diplomatic school, and through the army we are having regular in-depth briefings on geopolitics with a lot of international experts, with people that work for the foreign ministries of many countries. We have former ministers of defense that are coming to interact with us and briefing us, of course our own intelligence agencies, etc. So I'd say my level of information is certainly above average, already before all of this started. So my take on this conflict is, you can resume it to the following. It could have been prevented. It could absolutely have been prevented, and that it wasn't is of great concern to me. I think that there is more than just a question of pure self-defense of Ukraine at stake there, and I think that Ukraine is basically the victim of a larger game, of a larger game of interest that has been going on since the end of World War II. But to understand that, to see that, you need to know a lot of details about the diplomatic relations between the so-called West and the Eurasian powers, that means China and Russia and Iran and other powers in the area. You need to know the geography, why geography is important and how it plays out in certain parts. You need to know why it plays a role that Eastern Ukraine is only 300 something kilometers away from Volgograd, formerly known as Stalingrad. You know, to know why Stalingrad was the hugest battle of the hugest war in human history, why it was such an important. Yes, exactly. Why it was such an important location. Why they stuck together there.
Why?
Well, because the Volga goes down to the Caspian Sea there, and a lot of oil reserves, a lot of gas reserves, etc. are in the Caucasus. That's very important. If this area is cut off for Moscow, then they're basically checkmate in energy terms, in many terms, yes. So it's very important that they have the control over that. If Volgograd is cut off, then the entire communication from the Caspian Sea along the Volga River is cut off. You're checkmating at the time the Soviet Union or now Russia. So that's why this city is so crucial. And for the German
That's
effort,
why Hitler went.
yes, because he
for
wanted to cut
Stalingrad.
off the gap between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea is very narrow there.
Yeah.
If you cut it off and you have the control over the Caucasus and the oil fields there, it would have been brilliant for Germany that lacked oil and all that. And they would have tried to make a push through towards Iran, which was tendentially friendly to them. So there's a lot of these elements that need to be taken into consideration. Just because Volgograd is not called Stalingrad anymore doesn't mean that it's not as
Important.
strategically important anymore. You know, it is. And so, although nobody maybe has the intention of attacking it now or cutting them off there now, it's about the potential. States want to prevent potentials.
Sure.
So they don't even want to be in a situation where they could be threatened like that in a hypothetical future. And that's an abstract strategic thought.
And it's the same thing if you like say to a family you won't get any water from your garden or you don't get any food from your garden and there's no supermarket, so of course they want to have their water and fresh fruits.
I mean, it doesn't justify, of course, breaking international law. It never does. But it's not about justifying something. When you want to understand wider context, doesn't mean you endorse the actions that are taken. But by understanding it, we are in a better position to prevent it in the future. Now it's too late. Now the war is on. You know what I'm saying? Now it's on. But like, if we don't want this war to become bigger, to draw us all in, if we want that it doesn't flare up again in a few years or in 10 years and then erupts into a world war maybe, we need to understand it. We need to understand how to draw red lines, where we always need to be sensitive. Every country needs to be sensitive of its neighbors' needs. In terms of security, in terms of geography, in terms of geopolitics, etc. You cannot just ignore that. That's a rule. Imagine Austria just ignores German interests or Hungarian interests and we just do whatever we want without taking at all consideration of their interests. Then we are back in the Europe of the 19th century or before, where we have constant small-scale or neighborly conflicts and wars. We want to prevent that, so we need to find compromise all the time.
Just look out, there is the mountains.
The snow mountain, Schneeberg. You know, all the nice fresh water of Vienna comes from there. There's like all the aqueduct, which is now under the earth, that brings all the water to Vienna.
Here to Vienna.
Yeah, it's fresh, very fresh.
That's why it's so good.
Yep.
Yeah. Pity that we cannot show it.
Yeah, I tried to make a video, but of course I can't.
Anyway, so what you said, like the war in the Ukraine is on now. What's the goal of that war? And like the Ukrainians are self-defending themselves on the one hand. On the other hand, there is maybe that's the media telling. Maybe there's also another opinion or three opinions. What other views do you see on this topic?
Well, it's a very difficult question, and you can easily sit yourself in a hornet's nest here. I don't want to, you know, how would you call it in English? I don't want to offend any emotional feelings, especially in a war. There's a lot of emotions, and rightly so. And I don't want to endorse a one-sided view either. We know for a fact that in a war, truth dies first, and there's always propaganda, there's always misinformation. It's always, even if you don't want to spread propaganda, it's always very hard to keep an overview of what's actually happening. So there always will be faulty narratives, faulty recountings, etc. Which ones they are and to which extent, I cannot say because I'm not there. So as a soldier, I know even when I'm commanding a company, so it's a very limited area, if we are doing an action in a training event, we need a briefing afterwards because we don't know what the fuck happened. We're coming on and we're saying, okay, well, actually, like 200 meters from where I was, what happened over there? I actually don't know.
No idea. Huh?
So I need to find somebody who was actually there, and even then, it will be only one part of the truth. So it's very, very hard in a battle or in a conflict, in a war, to know what actually happened and how it actually happened. It's super hard. And anybody who tries to tell you the contrary is either lying or completely misinformed. That's something we can state with a high degree of uncontroversial security. In a war, it's absolutely hard to find out what actually happened and how. So, that said, so there's three major Western, mostly Anglophone geopolitical schools. There is the one of Halford Mackinder with the heartland and pivot area theory. There is Spikeman with the rimland theory, and there's also Alfred Thayer Mahan, with the rimland theory, and then there's the oceanic theory. So there's like always this kind of battle in geopolitics between maritime powers such as the United States or United Kingdom at the time, the British Empire, and continental forces such as classically Russia is a continental power. And one of the theories at the start of the 20th century said that eventually maritime powers are more powerful than continental powers because most of humanity lives on the coastlines. And that's where most of the trade is. And who controls the sea, the waters, the oceans, will control most of that. But the theory said that with technological advancement, railways, motorways, infrastructure, etc., at some point continental powers will be more strong and in a better position than the maritime powers. This is contested now because we're not speaking of maritime and continental space anymore as such. We're speaking about integrated space with actual space in space, with air, with land, with sea. It's all more intermingled and more interconnected. However, it's still true that Eurasia is a continent with 75% of the world's population living in it, and with a huge percentage of the world's resources located there.
Asia.
Eurasia.
Eurasia, yeah.
Yes. And also with the two most powerful economic zones on the planet, with Europe and with China and Southeastern Asia. So these are tremendous powers. But because this continent is so big and so culturally diverse and so challenging, it's easy to fragment it. So there is powers like Russia, which is in pole position to be the integrative force of Eurasia, that want to position themselves in such a way that they can really gap this Eurasian space and control it to their advantage. Then there is maritime powers, for lack of a better word now, like the United States, the United Kingdom, that want to forestall or act against this continental consolidation. And Europe, we're a bit in between. We have some maritime powers with France, but they're also continental powers, etc. The economically most viable, and I think everybody can agree on that, that's not very controversial, the economically most viable option for the future would be to have an axis Paris, Germany, Berlin, Moscow. So to use European money, European technology, European infrastructure and Russian resources to build a peaceful trade union. So to make peace by trade, peace by mutually beneficial relationships that would massively benefit Eastern Europe as well. So countries like Poland, Ukraine, the Baltics, Bulgaria, the Balkans, etc. That's the theory, that's the ideal situation. That's what a lot of politicians, like for example Schröder, or even Merkel, Macron, etc., that's the optimum they wanted. That's what we wanted all those years. And we were wary of American influence in Eastern Europe that doesn't want that. They tendentially want to keep Western Europe and Inner Eurasia and Russia separate. And the best way to do that is, of course, Eastern Europe, which is traumatized, and rightly so, by all those years of Soviet and Warsaw Pact occupation and subjugation. So they said, oh no, we don't want the Russians anymore. But on the long run, that's not a very sensible situation to have. And now we need to take also Russia's position and say, okay, well, if they really want this economically viable thing with Europe, which they did in the 90s and in the early 2000s, they should try a bit more, should try harder. And I know it's difficult because there is some interests also in Europe that are against that, but it's just, I think, not viable to act in such an aggressive way. Like they fucked it. They completely fucked it now.
Really?
If it ever was a chance for that,
really?
for this century, probably they fucked it.
Really?
And they think they can get away with that. We will see, the future will tell it. I think they should have waited and let pro-peace, pro-trade network and anti-Atlanticist, transatlanticist forces in Europe regroup and go for this peaceful option in Europe, which ultimately makes everybody, inclusive of the Eastern European countries, benefit. I can totally understand the security issues of Eastern European countries, totally. But they need a security guarantee from Europe, not from the United States, because the United States have a tendency to not bring security, but to bring insecurity, as we have seen over an interventionist policy over the past couple of decades.
Yeah.
So the track record isn't good, you know. So also, like when they said, "Oh, there's an imminent invasion from Russia," nobody, including myself, believed it. Not even the Ukrainians believed it. Why? Because they have lied so many times before about those things. Now they were right for once, and nobody believed them. Huh? So I don't think they are the best candidate for security guarantees. I think their presence makes stuff more insecure. As I said earlier, now the war is on, now people need help, but we need to provide help in such a way, in my opinion, that the war can end as soon as possible and not prolong it. It shouldn't become an Afghanistan, it shouldn't become like the trenches of World War I. That's not the humane. I think there's some things that are not worth that outcome.
But what's the NATO playing role? Like they are also kind of separated from the American aim for this region and for this separating West and East thing. The NATO is always also not a real good secure partner, like in the Bosnian War or in these wars. Like the NATO was also like just looking and not really doing, or they couldn't really do, because also Europe, the European policy didn't allow them maybe to do, or the European policy was not able to help. Like there is that film just came out, this film from the Serbian war against the Bosnians, and it showed the NATO role was really very, very badly organized, and they were really knowing that there is a genocide taking place, and they were watching it, and they couldn't do anything because they were undersourced. Like there were not enough soldiers, there were not enough weapons, there was not any strategy and stuff. So I just can imagine that the NATO also in this conflict is like just watching by, and then the war is over, and then you see the cruelty of the war, you see how many victims it gave and how many already refugees are on the way. So about the NATO, this is a question I don't really understand also, like how the NATO is working in between those diplomatic and non-diplomatic aggressive moves.
Well, I think it's a hard one. I don't know enough about that to be able to give a funded opinion. So I think we need to differentiate more between NATO, and I don't think it's so much about NATO. I think that's what the Russians said as well. It's not actually so much about NATO, because NATO is a defense pact in essence. It's more about American influence there. So one thing the Russian president said, which is noteworthy, I think, in my opinion, to understand their perspective, is he said, well, it's not so much about NATO, it's about how decisions are made in NATO. He said, he knows how decisions there are made. So if a country becomes NATO member, because initially they want a defense sort of situation, and deterrent, doesn't mean that this will stay like that. There is serious influence being taken. Decisions are not being taken in a really democratic way, according to them. So they're more worried about American influence within NATO than about NATO proper. So, because I think there is some NATO members like France and Germany that would rather act very differently than the United States would. So about their not being robust action of NATO in the war, it's of course been stated many times. It's because they know there is a real risk of World War III happening if they run in. You know, in a bar fight, the bar fight gets big when everybody rushes in. Yeah. If it's just two dudes smashing each other, it's one thing. But if then several dudes come in, and then there's the friends of the other dude that come in,
you have the chaos.
Then the bar gets destroyed. You know, and you have to think. when is the point when this becomes the better option? Is there a point where this becomes the better option, or is this never the better option? And it depends, you know. When you can quickly end a conflict or a genocide or something like that by going in with absolutely superior force, then of course that's the more viable option and the more humane one. But if you know from advanced, if you know from calculation that's not the case, and you might risk to trigger about 6,000 nuclear warheads flying around the place if you go in, then sorry, but it's just not worth it. And it sounds super cold, super cruel, but you know, if you want to prevent 10,000 dead or 100,000 dead, and by trying that you create a few million dead, is that clever? Have you reached your goal? No, you've made a much worse situation. And there's different ways of dealing with things. And as the Red Baron once said, you need to know the fights you can win and differentiate them from the fights you can't win. The ones that run into the fights they can't win, they're idiots. They're dangerous. You need to pick the fights you can win. So that's what I'm saying.
Who said that?
The Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. Apparently.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just heard. I really did not. That's why I'm asking you all these questions, and maybe also our listeners. I did not really have the time to go and to deal with that conflict, and like it's just coming after the pandemic and also the media. I completely lost, and I think also a lot of people here in Europe completely lost any relation to the media because of like the dealing with the pandemic and stuff. Like what we hear and what we know is that they are dividing our society in two fields somehow, and there are more or less really people that have difficulties now to believe and trust in society. And the next thing is like that, yeah, I mean, it is a war going on, and as you say, I mean, I have the impression that there are so many wars going on still, like in Yemen or in Africa or Afghanistan is like I mean the best example, where the Americans, as you said, that did not really make that place secure, just went away and left all their, I mean, that's also kind of not proven, but how many weapons they left there and how many stuff they left there, or how much mistake they left there. I mean, it's completely mistaken what they did there. Maybe I'm not, you know, I'm not into it because I'm not into war zones and stuff. I just have my tiny little political view on things, and I just say I couldn't deal like to inform myself, even not to inform myself. But I mean, I know about the Crim. We learned something in history about the Crim War in the Second World War and stuff. So, okay, as I understand from your speech as well, there is some importance about this geological parts of Europe and Asian Europe, or Eurasian, as you say. I can follow this, but the really detailed, as you say, I'm more into that war soon. Like I have my 200 meters, and I don't know even what is going on there. I just you know, I just struggle my life, and as we all do maybe, and that's why I cannot say anything. Yeah, to be honest.
Well, one of the problems is that most of us cannot say anything really, but we have a tremendous opportunity to say a lot all the time. You know, social media is that. Everybody that actually hasn't that much to say says an awful lot. And I think you just mentioned earlier media that are driving certain narratives and simplistic narratives that then create very segregated opinion groups, you know. And I think that's a feedback loop. I think that because we use social media the way we do, and social media is designed that we start using it a certain way, so that means strong opinions. We think we are much more important and much more heard than we are. Those people that interact very opinionatedly on social media, they're actually a minority. You know, most people say, "Oh, I don't even post anything on social media." Most people say, "I'm not even going there anymore." You know, like you just said, it's overwhelming, struggling, it's negative. But those people they are dominating social media, and they're often very vocal about their opinion. They feel the need to share their impression of a situation and to get confirmation. Oftentimes they want just confirmation. So you create this feedback loop, and media often they analyze. They're like, well, let's look at social media, let's look what is the sort of vibe in the population. What's the vibe there, and we need to reflect that. So there's all this idea in many media outlets, we need to reflect the public outrage, the public thing, you know, and then you get super like this feedback loop where the one thing that happens on social media, the one trend gets reflected in the media, that amplifies the trend on social media, which amplifies the narrative in the media, and it's a ping pong playing. And then the politicians that are, you know, politicians in the 70s would have been with this kind of hat, would sit and say, "Oh, there is a bunch of 100,000 people demonstrating out there against the nuclear power plant. Ha, plebeians, do we really need to care about that? The news is not printing that anyway." And they would react very slowly on these kind of public opinions sometimes. But now politicians are themselves hooked into the social media feedback loop. And they're much more sensitive to certain opinions, you know. And you can have a 180-degree change of political direction once you feel that the public opinion on social media switches, as we saw in the pandemic several times. Things that were absolutely not okay a few months ago suddenly became okay because people switched the narrative very easily. And it's a problem on the long run, you know. Makes us very, very volatile, very vulnerable to influence. And to hysteria. It's
hysteric. It's hysteric times. Like also Helmut Schmidt, before he died, he said like Russia needs to be the thing. What you said, he was maybe one of the members of this 1, 2, 3 theories you just told me. You have to tell me again. So Helmut Schmidt just said we need to be friend with Russia, not like to have it as an enemy. It makes no sense for the long term. And I think also, if I think to those old politicians that we learned in history, like Helmut Schmidt or Konrad Adenauer, who just said, like Adenauer, there's one sentence he said, like, why should I not change my mind from one day to the other? Like, if I would not change my mind, it would mean I would not think, or I would not, I would not think about what changes are needable or even necessary. And that's also something we see now in the pandemic. Like politicians, they say, okay, no, it's pandemic now, and we cannot cut any restrictions. Here in Austria, it's very straight and very like all the countries around, like Czech Republic and stuff, they already are open and back to normality, and here it's still like traumatized and hysteric about the numbers and about the different how do we call it, things we have to do to preventions about the pandemic. And as I said, I mean, as you said also, the society is cut into pieces, and on social media there's also another society like playing ping pong with all these influences. There is a fourth society on top of us. They are flying around again, like the airplanes are back, and they, I think, got out of the pandemic as kind of winners, because they kind of got a lot of money, and the life in the sky is something really crushing and crazy, seeing how many airplanes are on the way every day and how much resources it takes, and then to say, okay, like Fridays for Futures dialogues which are saying, okay, we cannot move anymore, it's pandemic, it's lockdown, and all of these people that are on Telegram and stuff in the social media, they also say, that's also just a preparation. These lockdowns in the pandemic, they will prepare us for climate lockdowns. To say, okay, guys, no flying anymore because we don't have the resources and stuff like this will maybe come up. We don't know. Yeah, it's a very strange, hysteric time, right?
It is, yeah. It's difficult to say something about that side of things with the climate change because it's highly complex models. There is, despite great apparent, concord on opinion, you have a lot of questions that remain because, as I say, with the pandemic, in the pandemic, you had a bunch of experts that were immediately called to action and called to advise. That were, of course, virologists, epidemiologists, mathematicians, and doctors, like medical experts and people. So these four groups were obviously the experts to go to, and people asked, how can we treat how can we form the best policies in this situation? But they forgot, of course, several other fields of expertise, which is psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, for example, and pedagogical advisors. So what they create is a situation where there's only a part of the expertise that is needed to really holistically treat a situation that was taken into account, and that thereby we create not the most efficient situation but an inefficient situation, because if the virologist says, well, from the standpoint of my science this is the most efficient way to do it, but then comes a sociologist which wasn't asked and that says, well, but your measures don't work because the species human, Homo sapiens, reacts badly on this and doesn't work, and it will prolong everything and it will make everything worse. But this expert wasn't maybe asked. I don't know it, but it seems that most of the panels around the countries that I saw, they didn't have those anthropologists and sociologists that were part of formulating them. So, for example, I always bring this example. If you say, what is the fastest way physically to transport a group of people from Vienna to, let's say, Bucharest? Well, it's the plane. So you say, okay, well, one expert says physicist says the physically fastest thing is if you have 300 planes and you get them all full, and then those people, you transport them to Bucharest, will be the fastest way. So now you get all these indiscriminately selected people, you bring them to the tarmac, but a certain percentage, let's say 20% of them, they just have a terrible, irrational fear of death, fear of flying. They do not want to fly, they do not want to go on the plane. So now they're in irrational panic of death, and they start to tear down the tarmac, they start burning cars in the airport, they start to manipulate
the machines and
start attacking the planes and the people that work there, and then you can't take off with the planes, or only very slowly, or the machines are not filling up very quickly, and suddenly you're losing almost a day or two or something like that, because there's all these riots happening from a minority, but still something consequential, because they just don't want to go on board. So had you listened maybe to a psychologist or anthropologist before, you would have said, okay, all those that have this irrational fear, here is the buses or here's the train, you go on the train, everybody else on the plane, just you fly, the rest on the train, let's go. But it didn't seem like this happened sufficiently, And the same thing I think is with the climate thing. We know certain things that we need to do that would be the most efficient, and some people say the only thing that will save us. But will it actually save us? Like, when society and civilization collapses because of trying to protect the climate, what do we have from it? So if people die everywhere because we made society collapse in order to save the climate, or if people die because of the climate, well, what's the better outcome? I'm not quite sure from a human standpoint. Maybe not from the standpoint of a fish or of a plankton or I don't know, some other species, but from the human standpoint, and we have to be egocentric a little bit. Like, I'm a human. Human interests are my primary concern. My own survival and my species. It's just a reality. What's the worst outcome for us? And this is not so clear. You know, we gotta choose careful. It's a very thin line between a good a bad decision and a very bad decision. You know. So
Very optimistic.
We gotta be.
GEZA.
Yeah. You know, a bad decision that's not as bad as a really bad decision is still better. Still a better outcome, you know? You can still find something positive in that. And who knows, we might still see some sort of technological breakthrough in some area that will help us more than we at the moment think.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you just explained also, like with the Eurasian community, which is now separated from this conflict in the Ukraine and stuff. It would be so great, I think, also for Russia to have all these technologies from Europe coming over the borders on the one hand. On the other hand, we have China with all their junk products, we call them, right? So flooding the market, imitating cheaply, building with their resources that they all get also from Africa. So then maybe it would be very helpful also to stop watching Africa as the only continent getting like raping resources what we did the last 100 years with Africa. So but to bring or to consolidate also there a continental like bridge, like just to say, okay, people come over. We have so much space in Europe. I mean, if you go through the villages, if you go through the cities, I mean, there is so much space. There are so many jobs that should and need to be done by people. Like, and when I see my friends from Burundi, and they are completely integrated, and they are working now in social, in pedagogics, and they go in these migration classes, and there are now the Ukrainian refugees. I just read a thread yesterday, and the kids are asking them, "Are you Austrian?" And they said, "No, I'm not. I'm from Burundi. I'm from Africa." And then, "Why are you speaking German perfect?" I said, "I learned it like the last 5 to 10 years. I grew up kind of here, and so." And we need those people. And he claims about, we are only 2 pedagogues in class. We are completely overloaded. We don't know how to treat like 19 kids with different social background, with different languages, with traumata from the pandemic, now traumata from the Ukrainian conflict. We don't fucking know what to do. We are not even educated to help those kids. We are not psychologically, informed how we can trigger them and how can we help them. And that's the situation now.
Yeah.
And we have so much money, we have so much space, we have so much resources also in Austria and Germany, in all these rich countries. And we talk about, I don't know, sending weapons to Ukraine in the politics. I mean, they talk about this. Or we talk about the Green Pass, like for a pandemic situation which lasts now 2 years and is kind of, I don't know what it is. So it is like the situation now, 2022, it is weird.
Yeah, we can
completely insane.
We can definitely say it's weird and strenuous for society in many ways. I mean, I think on Africa, the African Union is a pretty great project, I think, and it's worth supporting and worth developing the African Union, because it can develop into something potentially that helps them really protect their own interests, that helps to formulate and channel their own interests. And I think most people that flee from certain countries, there's always a moment where they'd rather stay in their own home country and rather have the opportunities to stay there, and they'd wish, well, if life situation in my country was good, I'd rather stay there. But it's not, so I need to move away. And then there's other problems with migration, so it's not that easy to integrate in societies where you get to. So yeah, I'm absolutely with that. That we need to put the African Union and certain African states in a position where they can help themselves and can develop their own infrastructure, their science, their education, their own tech sector as well. You know, they have a lot of space and a lot of resources there that they could use more locally. And I think
Das Hotel war, glaube ich, das da vorne, Olli.
Ja, genau. Sollen wir zu dem Hotel oder wie?
Eigentlich nicht. Eigentlich fahr mal auf die Friedrichshütte. Kannst du mal Friedrichshütte eingeben?
Ja, ja.
Genau. Weil das Hotel ist leider zu heute. Das gehört einem Kollegen. Der hat es anscheinend neulich gekauft.
Berg, Gasthaus, Friedrichshütte.
Arg, ne? Also das nächste Mal werden wir da nächtigen, aber dieses Mal ist es leider direkt auf dem Berg.
Are we going to have lunch?
No, we have chips and carrots.
That sounds...
Amazing, right? I also have a
Noch was zum Nahen Frisch?
buttermilk. Ja, ich glaube, Flavia möchte.
Das
So,
geht sich noch kurz aus.
yeah, Flavia, so we can have a short break to buy something here, okay?
Okay, fantastic. And you know what? If I had deleted the pictures, also on iCloud would be deleted.
No.
So I'm not,
No.
not student.
No,
Yes.
no,
There's gonna be a lot
you
of
have to
articles.
upload it on. I show you later.
They're all on iCloud. All of it are on
No, no,
iCloud.
no.
But if I delete it on my phone,
No, no,
so
no.
now I'm putting on Google Photo. So
No,
I can
oh
put
yeah,
it
that's also a way. But I can show you how I do it. I have to show you. Just go and have lunch now. I'm sorry. We are still into a discussion important. As you
Keep
here it
going.
is English, so you could follow a bit, right?
I've been following all.
Can you just open the door so we get some fresh air? Thank you very much. You followed it all, huh?
Yeah.
Amazing. You're a multitasker.
Yes. More than you expect.
Don't close the door!
Oh, you want to open mine? It's very sunny.
All right. Yeah, GEZA. Sorry for being interested in the African. Yeah, you said there's a lot of potential in this continent. Yeah, sure. I mean,
what I'm saying is whatever we've been doing so far, it didn't work. And you know, as more and more African heads of state say as well, is like, yeah, guys, you stop with all that sending money with the NGOs and sort of minding us like little children. That's not the approach. That's not the way how we're gonna get out of the mess. The way is probably we need to change our policies. International policies need to change, like the IMF and their programs. There needs to be these countries need a chance to breathe economically, and something that we cannot change from the exterior is the corruption. They have to change it themselves. You know, uncorrupt or stable institutions in a country, like ministries, like public bodies that manage a public life, etc. These are These are the foundations of a stable state where investment stability is given. And I think the type of investment that any country wishes for, to a large extent, is smaller and medium kind of investment that is not absolutely predatory. So, for example, I know of several projects in different African countries where they try to get medium and smaller investments from smaller fish in Europe that are directly having an effect there, and which are not absolutely cannibalizing and extracting money there. You know, like big companies like Nestle or whatever going in and just through the sheer size of what they can leverage and get out, actually having a detrimental effect on some areas. So I think that's one way forward, to say it very simply. And but this can only happen when they manage their corruption problems by themselves. We cannot manage it for them. You know? And of course, the problem with corruption is corruption comes when there is a lack of perspective. And as long as it's a hard vicious circle to break. This lack of perspective creates corruption. Corruption creates corrupt institutions. Institutions that are corrupt create lack of perspective. And Russia actually has the same problem. And Ukraine, by the way, as well. So these are things that are not easy to change. We're trying it in peace, in relative peace. We're trying this from the EU in the Balkans for decades now. It's slowly showing progress. It's slowly getting there, but not everywhere, and very slowly.
But the point about the EU, I mean the EU itself, and also like Austria is a good example for corruptive politics as well, as we just saw.
It's an illusion to get rid of it.
Yeah.
It's an illusion to get rid of it, but there's different levels. You know, in Austria, the daily level of corruption is not as high so as to impede investment security categorically. You know, it's very unlikely that an oligarch will turn up at your newly bought like bureau or something like that and say, well, you have a very nice office here, it's mine now, right? Here's the paper, you sign it, and I buy it for €1, right? And you're like, well, I don't want to give it, and he's like putting the gun on the table and says, are you sure? You know, this kind of shit happens in Ukraine and in Russia still today. And it happens in Africa, you know. You get General Butt Naked suddenly turning up at your company and saying,
Warlords,
"Well, we're getting all your products now for free because what are you gonna do?"
But how did like Europe? How did like maybe to finalize our talk? Do you think did Europe come to that point that it is so stable? On the one hand, on the other hand, it is so unstable, as we see now in terms of crisis, pandemic crisis, and war zones around Europe. We have the problem with the Frontex. We have the problem with the refugees. And there are no problems, but Europe makes it a problem. I have the impression, so that it's getting worse and worse. Because we are so stable. Like if you just look out here now, we are in Spital am Semmering. There is peace. There is everything like built up for generations and generations of people are working hard, like from farmers, as you said, like in the Roman Empire, like farmers can become millionaires, and here you see it's taking place. Like they have built hotels, they have built they did millions of money by ski tourism, and you have so much like tradition on the one hand. On the other hand, you have now Kärnten who says we need 5 tanks to protect us from Russia. I read yesterday, like Kärnten, the warlord of Kärnten, he ordered 5 tanks by train to put them around his village or around the borders of his little country. Like Kärnten is like one district of Austria. So people are going crazy on the one hand, and on the other hand, Europe is going crazy of its problems, like Fortress Europe. I always say we are the prisoners, and around us is water, and we cannot get out. And people are coming to us, but they don't know where they come to. So they don't know really. It is not really better what we have in terms of. I mean, we have a stable life, we have peace on the one hand. On the other hand, we have poverty. We have education systems that don't educate the truth. Like we have really a lot of lies going on, which also showed the pandemic now that all these lies come up, and they say, no, you're lie talkers, and you're Verschwörungstheoretiker, so you're
conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theoreticals and theorists, and no, you're talking bullshit. And on the other hand, it's so hard to understand it out of history, like what the Christian history, also the Catholics, they were also exploiting Africa, and so everything it's kind of, it makes sense on the one hand. On the other hand, it's completely nonsense. And like, to go back to CERN and your nice project Event Horizon, antimatter and matter, where you say we just read books like human is 80% water, and then it's like the rest is what we see, material, and it's also proven by scientists that it's even less, like it's only 0.00000.8% that we are just fluid energy. So everything we see is just always in progress. Like also our skin is changing all the time. our thoughts are changing all the time, and they are light is changing all the time. So it's it's, I think, all these questions of
well, I think we just need to structure our thoughts. We just need to structure our propositions in the various layers that we're talking in. So to come back to Europe maybe as a start, it ties in nicely with what I said at the start. That's why I like the Roman Empire so much in late antiquity, because it was dealing with a lot of problems for a period of time. It then collapsed in the West for very specific reasons. But for a period of time, it was dealing with religion, with spirituality, with culture, with ethnical differences and large geographical areas quite well. Of course, there was civil wars, there was other problems, etc., that were endemic to the period. But in general, if we look at the construction of that empire, it lasted so long for a few reasons that are pretty good, that we can study for today, in a cultural sense. There was this strong overarching state culture. Everybody could dial into it. It's like a phone number you can dial in. Then you have the state culture. You're Roman, and there you're all Roman. Whether your skin tone is this or that, whether your native tongue is Gallic or Egyptian, Coptic or Aramaic or whatever, you could all dial into this common culture where you all meet and you all understand each other. Then you have your local cultures that are very different often, but it doesn't matter because you have this common culture, that state culture. And that's why I like late antiquity, because it wasn't an Italian thing anymore. It wasn't I dial into the Italic culture. No, it was a Roman culture. It was overarching. It was a huge European and the Mediterranean empire. It brings me to the next thing, because you said Fortress Europe, and so I think it's very important that Europe starts to understand its geography again better. The geopolitical boundary between Europe and Africa proper is not the Mediterranean. It's the Sahara and the Sahel zone. And I think a lot of people, especially in France, they understand this. So I think we have a tremendous interest to integrate better economically, culturally again, with all the Northern African countries. Therefore, it's such a tragedy that Libya is a failed state now. I think a lot of people have realized that we would have probably fared better with Gaddafi in power than with what we have now. Tunisia is in absolute disarray again politically. The president has just dissolved the parliament just a couple of days ago. So much for the Arab Spring and our hopes. You just have to deal with different state cultures, different cultures in a way that's viable and realistic. And we should propose advantages and build mutual bridges culturally and economically. That's always, I think, the better proposition. And in this proposition, the Levant, the Near East, Northern Africa and Europe are a unity, just like in Roman times. We cannot use the Mediterranean Sea as a divide. It's the Sahara that is the divide. Sahara is much more difficult to cross than the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is an enabler of traffic, the Sahara not. Not really. So this is something very important, I think, for the future, that we realize that and that we work towards that. The same thing can apply to many other European decisions that are at the moment formed, of course, by a reality that is hard to change. But that's why it's so important that we have long-term strategies. And of course, in the immediate, the Ukraine crisis demands certain reactions from us. But on the long term, we can't make Russia into North Korea too. That's the long-term thing, the reality that we just need to somehow deal with and formulate a long-term strategy. The same thing with the migration crisis, etc. We can't have unlimited migration to Europe, and we can't have unlimited defense against migration in Europe. So we need to find a way, exactly.
Middle way.
Yes, where and also, as you said very, very correctly, we need more working force. We are an over-aging society.
Yeah,
so we need to find a way how people can come back in and out. Because that's what people want. They don't necessarily want to live here all the time. They want to maybe be in their own culture. But they want to earn maybe a bit more money. So that was a deal that worked with Southeastern Europe for some time. They come here, they work here in jobs that maybe the local population doesn't cherish so much anymore, because they are they
cannot handle it anymore.
Well, they're not well paying also. They're just not attractive for a number of reasons. And because there is, for the money you get here, you can buy much more stuff back there. It was a good deal. The people there said, well, I want more money with which I can buy much more in my own country. So I go there, live a, well,
half a year.
shitty life for a couple of years, save some money, go back home and build a mansion or build some better existence there. That was let's say, a workable deal for some time. And we need to find out how we can make that even better for both sides. And as long as the European Union doesn't manage that, because it cannot control resurgent nationalism in Europe and nationalist and isolationist narratives, we will have a problem. And the European Union won't be able to control these resurgent nationalist narratives as long as it seems weak, as long as it doesn't speak the language of power. And what do I say with language of power? Is it authoritarianism? No, it's not. Is it militarism? To an extent, yes. You know, the Roman Empire came and it proposed to the people, not just, oh, either you're with us or we subjugate you. That wasn't always the case. That's a very two-dimensional view. For example, the territory of Austria today, it integrated into the Roman Empire by bilateral trades over a certain period of time, not by war. So what did the Romans say? They said, well, we have this huge franchise, this empire, you can be part of it, you can keep your culture, do everything as you like. We bring you much more architecture, we bring you much more infrastructure, we bring you much more money, and we bring you much more security. We bring you the legions, they're stationed here, and then you're safe. And that was true for a couple of 100 years, you know. So that's a little bit the idea behind NATO. So I find NATO is a strange thing, because NATO is transatlantic, and transatlantic is not a geopolitical figure, really. Europe it doesn't have the same interest. America and Europe don't have the same inherent geopolitical interest.
Of course not.
So I think the EU should take over the military side of NATO and I have written a concept about that, you know, how we can make a EU army more likely, and how to not destroy national armies. I think national entities still have a right to exist, and they have a need to have their own army. But there is a possibility to look at the French Foreign Legion system and implement a similar system on an EU level. But that leads too far.
Yeah, but
it's important that the EU has power, that it can project power, that it can be attractive for other countries to submit into this EU culture, this EU identity. And the EU does need, in my opinion, but that's my personal preference, that sort of historical connotation and this historical common narrative, which is the Roman Empire. Of course, the EU can't come and say, oh, we're now the Roman Empire reborn. It's not going to happen. It's also cheesy, and it's cringy. So we're not doing that. But in essence, we need to do it. In essence, the EU needs to say, well, we come from the Roman Empire, and we want the same geopolitical reality that the Roman Empire created, because it makes sense.
Because it was good.
It worked for stability,
ways,
for some ways. Minus crazy emperors and corrupt tax officials.
Autocrats.
Well, I don't think the whole narrative of decadence is quite wrong, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything that indicates that the Roman society in late antiquity was in any way more decadent than it was before. That was not the problem. They had bad emperors, bad leaders. There was child emperors and emperors that were just corrupt and uneducated, so they took bad decisions. They had bad high officials, so that the whole state apparatus around the emperor became more corrupted and bad, and that was the failure of the state. Bad leaders make bad institutions make bad states fall apart. So we have to certainly improve our EU apparatus. I think everybody agrees with that. And we need to offer a better alternative to nationalism. It's nothing against patriotism. I think that can be a force for the positive. But nationalist isolationism and is I think a problem for the EU. And it's a symptom for a lack of language of power that the EU doesn't really speak.
Right, GEZA. I have here for the end. I have here a video which we can play in our podcast here But for now, it's a video about man vision, which is YouTube video, just like one of these funny ones. But I really like the idea about it. It's like time travel, and you imagine how the world goes through all these wars until humanity comes to a spiritual, enlightened humanity without cruel wars, without poverty and stuff. And it's a nice one of these conspiracy videos, which really is funny. And I think, I hope that also, like, we as humans, Homo sapiens, we are kind of, getting better, like the wine. Like the longer we grow, the longer we deal with all these conflicts, and then the more generations are talking clear and trying to get away from these conflicts, the more we have a possibility to change the world.
Well, I hope the Fermi paradox doesn't come in the way there. If we believe the official narrative, which might quite well be true, I'm not quite sure, that we haven't found any trace of intelligent extraterrestrial civilizations yet in this vast universe with all these planets, etc. Fermi paradox says that there might be a reason that every civilization that might have existed always comes to a point before they become intergalactic, interstellar, where they collapse, because this point from becoming a type 0 to a type 1 civilization and then to a type 2 civilization there's always maybe some inherent flaw in the way civilizations act, that they collapse before they really become a type 2 or type 3 civilization. So that's why we haven't found any yet. So that's the hypothesis in the Fermi paradox. So I hope it doesn't come in the way. I hope that technological progress doesn't inherently create a moment where we just wipe ourselves out.
No, it doesn't. The video is very optimistic. It says like more or less that human being can like teleport himself then, and that we get to this spiritual, as you say, like I can just imagine now what you say, but species 1, species 2, species 3, that we are becoming a species which is kind of going with the physics of nature and going back to all this, which leads us to our souls and to our mother civilization and stuff like that. So, GEZA, anyway, I would say we're gonna have a little break now for 2 minutes just to finish our podcast here. Thank you for being with me, and thanks for the nice talk.
Thanks for the invitation.
And that's it. So let's make a cut here. And you find GEZA find all the links here down the video and down the podcast. Thank you also Oliver and Flavia and Laura for being with us. Thank you. Let's go. Let's show around here our working space. So this is Spital am Semmering. This is Oliver's car. This is Flavia sitting there, and Laura from Berlin. We are all together on a little road trip. Did you already stop?
Grüß dich. Nein, gar nicht.
You say make a cut. And I made a cut.
Yeah.
Because I'm a diligent person.
You're
But
very
I've done another
diligent.
one.
Okay, don't worry.
Urban Vibes.